Welcome dear audience, students and scholars. Here I am Dr. Amjad Ali. In this video we will learn about measuring the cost of living with the help of the consumer price index. A dollar today does not buy as much as it did 20 years ago. The cost of almost everything has gone up. This increase in overall level of prices is called inflation, and it is one of the primary concern of economists and policymakers. So, dear scholar, in this video we highlight some of the measures of living standard and provide a comparison of CPI and GDP deflator. So start from the price of a basket of goods. The most commonly used measure of the level of prices is the Consumer Price Index. Pakistan Bureau of Statistics, which is a part of Pakistan Finance Division under the Ministry of Finance, has the job of computing the Consumer Price Index. It begins by collecting the prices of thousands of goods and services, just as GDP turns the quantities of many goods and services into a single number, measures the value of production. The Consumer Price Index turns the prices of many goods and services into a single measure, that the overall level of prices. So here we have the question that how should economists aggregate many prices in the economy into a single index that reliably measures the price level? They could simply compute an average of all prices, yet this approach would treat all goods and services equally, because people buy more chicken than mutton in Pakistan. The prices of chicken should have a greater weight in the Consumer Price Index than the price of mutton. The Bureau of Statistics weighed different items by computing the price of a basket of goods and services purchased by a typical consumer. The CPI is the price of this basket of goods and services relative to the price of same basket in some base year. For example, suppose that the typical consumer buy 5 apples and 2 oranges every month. Then the basket of goods consists of 5 apples and 2 oranges, and the CPI become the formula for the CPI become, and CPI is equal to 5 plus multiplied by current price of apple plus 2 multiplied by current price of oranges divided by the base year price of apple and the base year price of the oranges. So in CPI 2009 is the base year. Here the index tells us how much it costs now to buy 5 apples and 2 oranges relative to how much it costs to buy the same basket of fruit in 2009. So Consumer Price Index is the most closely watched index of prices, but it is not the only such index. Another is the Producer Index, Sensitive Price Index, which measures the price of a typical basket of goods bought by firm rather than consumer. So another statistic also used for the inflation, sometimes called the core inflation, measure the increase in the price of consumer basket that exclude food and energy product, because food and energy prices exhibit substantial short-term volatility. Core inflation is sometimes viewed as a better gauge of ongoing inflation trend. So CPI versus the GDP deflator, we know that the implicit price deflator for GDP, which is the ratio of the nominal GDP to the real GDP. So the GDP deflator and the CPI give somewhat different information about what's happening to the overall level of prices in the economy. There are 3 key differences between the two measures, between the CPI and the GDP deflator. The first difference is that the GDP deflator measures the prices of all goods and services produced, whereas CPI measures the prices of only goods and services bought by the consumer. So we can say that an increase in the price of goods bought by only by firms or the government will show up in the GDP deflator, but it is not in the part of CPI. The second difference is that the GDP deflator includes only those goods produced domestically, whereas CPI is impacted by domestic and imported goods at the same time. Imported goods are not part of GDP and do not show up in the GDP deflator. So an increase, while talking about, so an increase in the price of imported imported cars sold in Pakistan affect the CPI because these cars are by the consumer, but it does not affect the GDP deflator. The third measure and the most subtle difference result from the way the two measures aggregate the many prices in the economy. The CPI assigns fixed weight to the prices of different goods, whereas GDP deflator assigns changing weights. So in other words, we can say that CPI is computed using a fixed basket of goods, whereas GDP deflator allows the basket of goods to change over the time as the consumption of or we can say the composition of GDP changes. The following we can say that the example which we have discussed in our previous session, previous slide, that if the so much rainy season destroy the crops of the oranges, the quantity of oranges produced fall to zero, and the prices of the few oranges remain on the grocery shelves are a very high level. So because oranges are no more part of GDP due to destruction of the whole field of oranges, that is reduces the oranges part in GDP, and it is no more part of GDP deflator. But because the consumer is computed with a fixed or consumers are attached with a fixed basket of goods and services, so CPI include the rising price of oranges in the basket, so CPI also rises. Index construction, this is a more important part, while the construction of CPI or GDP deflator as well. And the detail of index construction has been given in a separate video when you watch some my videos on statistical inferential statistics. So economists call a price index with a fixed basket of goods as a list price index, and a price index with a changing basket as a purchase index. So economic theorists have studied the properties of these different types of price indexes to determine which is a better measure of the cost of living. So when prices of different goods are changing by different amount, less peers or fixed basket index tend to overstate the increase in the cost of living, because it does not take into account the fact that consumers have the opportunity to substitute less expensive goods or more expensive one. Okay, by contrast, our purchase index tends to understate the increase in the cost of living, although it accounts for the substitution of alternative goods. It does not reflect the reduction in consumers' welfare that may result from the substitution. So we have discussed the example of destroyed oranges crops shows the problems with the less peers and purchase price index, because CPI is a less peers index, it overstated the impact of increase in the orange's price on consumer by using a fixed basket of goods. It ignores consumers' ability to substitute apple for oranges. By contrast, because the GDP deflator is a cautious um, index, it understated the impact on consumer. The GDP deflator show no rise in price, yet surely the higher price of oranges make consumer price worse off. So luckily the difference between the GDP deflator and the CPI is usually not large in practice, and it is not used for the comparison of inflation rate. So for the better understanding about the Pasha's or Lister's price indexes, you can watch another video related to statistic. So this is all about measuring the cost of living with the help of consumer price index and comparison of consumer price index and GDP deflator. So see you with another video. Ciao.